Alec Kruger had called 911 and reported that there had been an intruder at his residence and that his parents had been shot. You hear what sounds like a possible gunshot, and then the call goes dead.
Coming up to the house, there really wasn't any indication of anything gone wrong.
As you go up the stairs is the main bedroom or the master bedroom. Alec was found lying on the bed, and Tracy was on the floor on the opposite side of the bed in that main bedroom. Tracy Kruger and Alec Kruger were both deceased and appeared to have multiple gunshot wounds. Hillary Kruger had suffered a gunshot wound, and she was in very critical condition, but was able to communicate with the initial responding officers for at least a short period of time.
Ma'am, do you remember what happened?
I just heard noise. Tell my husband to wake up.
You told your husband to wake up?
That's when the guy shot us.
Do you know what the guy looked like?
Just tall and thin, I think.
Do you remember what kind of gun he had?
Long.
Anytime you take a gunshot wound at close range like that and have serious injuries, I think the likelihood of her dying was much greater than the likelihood of her surviving.
We got in her car and drove to one of his friend's house that we thought he would be at. And sure enough, that's where Zach was. Then we sat down and explained what happened. And that was a very, very difficult conversation to have. That was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do.
We had a close-knit family. We loved each other very much. The relationship between my mom and dad, you could tell they truly loved each other and they were always by each other's side. My dad was really into snowmobiles and snowmobile racing, so we would always go and watch him. My mom would always be there cheering him on.
Tracy and Hillary definitely had a type of relationship that everybody dreams about having. Just a perfect American family.
I loved hanging out in the garage with my dad, watching him work on cars or snowmobiles, and my brother would always be right next to him watching him. He was just kind of that class clown that made everybody laugh.
I know Alec, he'd probably be just like his dad, making things go fast, working on snowmobiles, doing things with his hands, playing guitar. And I know Tracy would still be married to Hillary and they'd be living a great life. Growing up on a farm, you know, that was a dream of his. And unfortunately, he was there for a very short time. I don't think they even lived in that house for a year and a half when this tragedy happened.
The background on the Kruger family was they're just a standard middle America family living their lives and working their jobs and raising their children. And so to have somebody come into their house and attack them in this brutal fashion didn't really make sense at first. There's a lot of unanswered questions, a lot of unknowns. Did somebody end up at the wrong house? Was there a confrontation at this house? What would be the motive?
They discovered a shotgun near the northeast bedroom, the phone off the hook, and shotgun shells lying throughout the upper staircase.
We suspected, because of that gun being in proximity to the bodies and empty shell casings at the top of the stairs, that was likely the murder weapon.
So when I first drove up that night, there were 2 vehicles stuck at the end of the driveway, just east of the residence. You could see that both were stuck backwards in the ditch, like they had spun out.
We were trying to figure out the 2 vehicles in the ditch. What is the relationship? Was Tracy Kruger or somebody else from the family down here on the road at some point?
There was a little blue, like, toe strap sticking out from the front of the pickup. There was a single set of footprints leaving the vehicles.
The license plates were run on the vehicles, and that's what told us that one was registered to Michael Zabawa and the other one was registered to the Kruger family. At that point, we are going to want to talk to Michael Zabawa.
We get a radio call from one of the Waseca police officers that a neighbor's reporting his vehicle has been stolen. We have no idea what's going on. The assailant's still out there. We want to be very cautious, and we don't want anybody else hurt or killed. The stolen vehicle was found maybe 100 yards from Zabawa's house.
There were footprints near the vehicle that you could follow down the street and right up to the Zabawa residence in the snow. We don't know who all resides in the residence. We don't know how many people are in there. We don't know if they're armed or what their state of mind is.
We already knew that there was 2 people dead, possibly 3. There was a weapon involved. We had SWAT team gathering in case we needed them for entry. And then shortly after 7 a.m., we get the 911 call from Michael Zabawa trying to report that his vehicle is stolen.
He wanted to speak to law enforcement to file a stolen vehicle report. So we just communicated with the dispatcher to relay to him, meet us at the end of the driveway, and we would take it from there. When Michael Zabawa exited the residence, he came out with his mother, walked down the driveway where we were. We approached him and introduced ourselves to him. Said we understood he wanted to report his vehicle stolen. We explained to him that we have questions about this matter and that we'd like to talk to him at the sheriff's office. He agreed voluntarily to come with.
We wanted to get information quickly because we don't know if Michael Zabawa is the guy or if it's somebody else.
I'm just, for the record, I want to, we talked about a couple things walking over to the truck. We explained to you you're not under arrest at this point, okay? But we do want to talk to you about an investigation, obviously, that we're working on and stuff like that. So we asked if you'd come in, and you said that's okay by you, right?
Yes.
Okay. You called 911 a little bit ago, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And you realized what was missing?
I woke up at like 10 to 7. I was going to go start the pickup. I just looked outside to see if it snowed and all. My pickup wasn't sitting where it was.
Okay.
That's why I was calling.
So
I asked my mom, I go, did you move, if she moved my pickup and all that? And she said no. And that's
okay.
the way we called.
When was the last time you saw your truck?
Last night.
You went to work yesterday?
Yeah.
What time did you get done with work?
I got done with work. It was about 2:30, 3 o'clock.
Okay, and then what time did you come home?
It was about 5, 6 o'clock.
Okay.
I got home.
And then you stayed home all evening?
Yeah.
Okay, have you been drinking right now?
Before.
Okay, because I do smell a little bit of alcohol in your breath, you know. And that's, you know, it's good you're being honest about that. I mean, you weren't driving right now. You're not, you know, that's not a problem. It's not uncommon for suspects to sometimes make contact with law enforcement to try to provide a story or provide an explanation that's going to serve them and serve their purpose in a case. And so we were certainly suspicious early on, just not knowing many of the facts. So, have a chair, Mike, and get comfortable. It's a very serious, very heinous crime. Certainly, we're laser focused on getting information and figuring this out and getting the truth. The tape's been running pretty much the whole time, Mike, but, on the way in we talked a little bit, and I read your rights, correct?
Yeah.
And you understood those, right? And I'm good at reading people's faces, and the look on your face is that there's more to the story, and that you want to tell me, but you're afraid to.
My mom, she was in pretty grave condition. I remember family members and doctors saying that there was a low chance of her making it out of it. Knowing that my dad and brother didn't make it, I was kind of in a shocked state. I didn't know what to say, what to do. I was praying that my mom would make it through. We had not processed the crime scene to any degree at that point. We hadn't been able to gather much information from the scene or any witnesses. Our plan to interview him certainly was just, gather information about his timeline of events. That's what I'm asking you to do right now, is tell Trevor and I the truth about where you were last night.
At home.
You were at home.
I was at home.
Right. And what I'm concerned about is we found your truck, okay? I told you on the way up here, we know that it's in the ditch. We also found a stolen truck, okay? Another pickup, not far from your house, okay? That was stolen close to where your truck was, okay? And there's footprints from that truck leading to your house, okay? We know you were out last night. Where were you drinking at? I mean, you're drinking. You already told me you're drinking. What difference does it make if you tell me where at? Second, you know what I mean? Where were you drinking at?
Larry's.
In town here?
Yeah.
In Waseca?
Yeah.
Okay. Were you drinking with friends, by yourself?
With a friend.
Mr. Zabawa, on the car ride in, he indicated that he had been at work the previous day, and then he went home and that he was home all evening. He said he was drinking at home alone. As the interview progressed, his story slowly changed. Okay. What time did you stay there till?
It was about 10 to 11.
Okay, then where'd you go?
Went back to his place and then went home.
Okay. How did your truck end up in the ditch, though? Did you leave your house again, or where's that?
No, I went home.
Okay, but you see, Mike, where the problem lies here? The stolen truck. Are your fingerprints going to be in it?
No.
You sure of that?
Yeah.
Okay. These are the shoes you were wearing last night?
Yes, they are.
Are these footprints going to match the footprints in the snow by the stolen truck?
No.
So when a suspect gives you that kind of confident answer that, no, you're not going to get me on this, or you're not going to trip me up on this issue, it does kind of make you set back a little bit and try to figure out, where am I going to go with this now? I'm not going to bullshit you. There's some bad shit happened last night. I know it. You know it. You have the facts. I have ideas. I think you went in the ditch. I think you were cold. Probably under the influence a little bit. Okay? You tried to get your vehicle out. It didn't work.
Okay? You tried to get back in where you're warm, and there was some type of a confrontation. Okay? And that's where you got to fill in the blanks for us. What I'm getting at, Mike, is a person is dead. They were shot. How that happened, I don't know. That's where you come in, okay?
If somebody accused me of shooting somebody and I hadn't, I'd be quite upset. Angry, I think, would be the reaction we would expect from most innocent people.
I tell you what I'm going to do. Drink your coffee. I'm going to step out for just a minute, okay?
Yeah.
Statement. Okay, man?
Yeah.
All right. I'll be back in a minute.
Is there smoking in here at all?
What's that? Do you want to go have a cigarette?
If it's all right.
Do you want to
Yeah,
take
I'll
them
go
upstairs and have a cigarette?
Sure.
Why don't we do that? Let's take a break. We'll stop the tape at this point.
It's important that people are allowed to have that emotional break from the interview and kind of allow him to reset. It's an opportunity for us to try and get some information from other colleagues who are at the scene.
Let's come back in, turn the tape back on. The time now is about 09:46 hours. Just we're out, had a smoke break. You guys were outside chatting.
Yeah.
Didn't talk about the investigation at all when you were outside, right? Okay. I did check on a couple things, Mike, and basically I talked to one of my partners, and he's interviewed your mom. Okay? Initially you said you were home from 5 o'clock on. Well, that's not true. Then you said you were home at 11. Well, that's not true. You see what I mean? And your mom says she heard you come in around 3:30 in the morning. Now things are falling apart already. Your mom's saying you came in at 3:30 in the morning. She heard you. And your mom isn't trying to get you in trouble, okay? She's your mom. You know what I mean? She loves you. But she's telling the truth. Tell us the real story.
We left the bar, it was probably, it was closed, it was about 1:30, somewhere in there. Went to Eric's house, sat there, that was probably, they had a few more beers at his place. I left there, it was about 2:30, 2:05.
Okay. Then where did you go?
I went home.
Okay. Now we're back to where we were again.
I know.
We had gotten information in that first break maybe about the shoes that they saw at the house when they secured it, matched the footprints in the snow.
These shoes that you're wearing right now don't match the ones we're doing. So what other shoes do you have at the house?
Boots?
Okay. There's some black slip-on shoes that your mom said were yours. Are those yours?
Yeah.
They're your shoes. You've admitted it. Your mom's admitted it. Your family's all said those are your shoes. And they match the footprints. So now somebody was wearing your shoes and come and stole your truck? And then brought your shoes back?
These are the ones I was wearing. I've been wearing these. I barely wear the slip-ons because it's too cold. I wear these ones all the time.
Not last night.
When you're throwing these bits of information out, it reminds Michael Zabawa that we do know a lot of information, and we're going to know a lot more as this case plays out.
You keep changing the story every little bit. You know what I mean? First it was I was home all night. Then it was I went home at 11. Now it's I got home at 3.
Yeah, I know.
This is really kind of your shot. You know what I mean? This is your chance.
Yeah.
Okay? To tell your side of the story. Okay? Explain to us the deal. Tell us what happened. We can all
already told you what happened.
I was getting very frustrated, hence the sigh and the interview. We now have evidence that we're explaining to you, and you still go back to this story. He's not biting on the shoe prints. He's not biting on the fingerprints. How do we keep moving forward to keep him talking, and how do we get him to and motivate him to tell the truth?
Is there something I'm doing that's causing you to be afraid to tell the truth?
No.
Tell us the way it went down, Mike. How did this work out? Please tell us.
I didn't go in the ditch. I didn't break into any house.
Then please explain to me how all this evidence says otherwise.
It was getting long and frustrating listening to his responses.
When we've been at it for a little while, it's always a good time to, maybe take a break and step out.
I'll be right back. You guys want to take another smoke break?
Okay.
You want to do that? Like, go talk to her? Okay, the time now is approximately 10 o'clock. Can you make a note of that? And we'll take a brief little break. Okay.
When Hillary first went into the hospital, she wasn't conscious yet. She finally started showing progress, and it was at that time you finally felt like she's going to make it.
That was an important piece of information that I wanted to use to confront Mr. Zabawa with. She may be able to tell us what happened. So it was kind of an additional piece of leverage to try to get him to tell the truth.
Here you are one day, you've got a great friend, a brother, and the next day you don't have him, and I can't even explain how that changes your life. Your brain is constantly trying to figure out, why did this happen? Why? It's just one big circle. That's the last thing you're gonna think of, is somebody coming in the middle of the night and just start shooting at you while you're in a dead sleep. That just doesn't happen.
First thing is the female from the residence, Hillary. She's in surgery right now. Okay, so we can't talk to her yet, but she's going to survive. I have no doubt she saw you. It's really time to tell the truth. What were your intentions? What the hell happened?
I already told you.
No, you've told me you were home sleeping, and that's not the case, Mike. There'll be a trial. Or you can just get out in front of this right up front, explain what happened. Okay?
Mm.
You know what I mean? Did you go there and intend to kill those people or not?
No.
Okay. Then why did you go to their house?
Those pauses allow that pressure to build. People generally don't like that awkward silence, and so you let that silence sit and you let that build, and you leave the ball in his court, so to speak, and say, how are you going to respond to this?
Give me the reason. Please, explain it to me. Just tell me why you went to their house.
You know what I think about?
Okay, that makes sense. And did you use their truck to try and pull your pickup out then? What happened that you couldn't get your pickup out?
Probably talk to you.
You were trying to do this by yourself. So you didn't have somebody to sit in your vehicle and help?
Yeah.
Okay. Then what?
Took that pickup.
Okay. So you took that pickup, and then where did you go?
Home.
Okay. And what time was it that you got home about? Okay. Then what time did you wake up?
7 o'clock.
Okay? This stuff's all fitting now. This is good. You're telling the truth. Okay? This is the right thing to do. Trust me. Okay?
He knows what happened ultimately in that house. I wanted to make sure and see if there was an accomplice or other people involved present at the crime scene.
Okay. We're missing the big piece here, though. But, okay, you're on the right track. We're missing the big piece about where the confrontation happened and how
I had
they...
to go in the house, though.
Okay.
I just went to the vehicle and seen if the keys were in.
Okay. But you had to have some contact with these people.
I did not go in the house.
How did they end up shot?
I don't know.
Okay, nobody's going to believe that it's just a coincidence that you were in their yard stealing their car at the same time they ended up dead. Okay?
I did not go in the house.
Why, God, oh, man. I thought we're over the hump. Mike, you're over the hump, okay?
I know that.
There's no point in saying this. There's no point in it. Tell the truth about what happened when you were in the house. Okay?
I didn't go in the house.
I sat back in my chair and almost threw my arms up in frustration. You can't say this and expect people to believe it because it doesn't match with the facts that we know.
What was your intent when you went in there? Was it just to seek some help to get out of the ditch? Was that your intent?
Yeah.
Most people would do that if it was 25 below out, wouldn't they? Try and get some help, right?
Yeah.
Then what happened from there? Nothing.
We were kind of stuck in a pattern of this, incremental admissions. We didn't feel that we had anything to lose at that point by trying another tactic. Introducing a new face, he may react differently.
Yeah,
Hey,
come on in.
how you guys doing?
Good.
Mike?
This is Gene Leatherman. He's another agent with the State Crime Bureau, okay?
Hey, I've been monitoring your conversations as you guys are going on in here. Talk about, what happened. Did you surprise the husband, or what happened that led to the struggle?
I didn't go in the house.
We know you were there. We are going to put you inside there. The only thing we don't have is your reason for doing it. Or did you go in there to go in and kill a little kid the same age as your sister? Did you?
There's no point in not telling the whole truth at this point, okay?
Yeah.
Tell the truth. You feel bad. I can see it in your face. Okay?
And I think it bothers you the most about that little boy.
He knows who he shot, but it reminds him and amps up that emotional level that this is very, very serious. You did this and a child was killed.
What happened? Get it off your chest.
Someone does now because he didn't say anything about a little boy.
What do you mean?
He never said anything about a little boy yet.
Well, I'm telling you about there's a little boy. The little boy is on the phone. I can guarantee you that is the question that's going to haunt you and your family and these people's family, is why did this happen? And that is what I'd like to hear from you. Why? Look me in the eye. Tell me why. Just tell me why you would do that. I know you normally wouldn't. And given different circumstances, I don't think you would. You're in somebody else's house when you're not supposed to be in their house. And they are going to either assault you to stop you from doing that, plus they're going to call the cops. Now that's why I think, personally, that's why I think you shot them. It's because you were trying to protect yourself. That's the only reason that I can see. Am I right?
Yeah.
I thought so. I thought it was. And that makes me feel better about you. Because I just can't see you walking in there and shooting some kid.
No, it went off.
It went off accidentally?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it was a pretty important moment. It wasn't the whole truth yet from him, but he's at least admitting that he was in the house and is involved in the shooting.
Okay. What kind of a gun was it? A rifle? A semi-automatic or a bolt-action rifle? Or pump? What kind?
You pump it?
Okay, then tell me what happened. Give me the story. Give me your part of the story about what happened.
From the time when you went in the ditch. Start from the beginning, okay?
When I went in the ditch, I went up to the house,
Okay.
tried the door. It was locked. The vehicle was sitting outside.
Right.
I opened it, the keys were in there, and I seen the garage door open.
Right.
Went in the house, yelling for somebody, and then that's when everything happened upstairs. And then
Was your idea maybe to, what, ask them to come out and help you get out of the ditch?
yeah,
Okay. Okay, well, you were where in the house? What part of the house?
upstairs,
In the bedroom?
in the hall.
Okay. And is anybody answering?
No.
No. Okay. So then what happened? Tell me how this...
I said like 5, 6 times, and I was in the hallway, and that's when he just come right out of the bedroom with the gun.
Okay. And it was pointed at you?
Yeah, me.
Okay. And what did he say?
Huh?
What did he say?
He told me to get out of it and kill me.
Right? Then what happened?
Huh?
Then what happened?
Well, I was gonna turn it on, and then all of a sudden he pumped the gun.
He pumped the round into the gun?
Right.
Jacked the pump.
Yeah.
Okay. And then what?
That's when I turned it on, and I grabbed it so that he wouldn't do anything.
Okay. Then what happened?
And then I got it away from him, and it went off. And it went off like 3 times when we were together. So me and him were going at it.
Okay. So then it goes off, and then how does it hit the wife
When we were struggling.
when you're struggling?
Yeah.
Are they saying anything to you?
She was just going, oh my God, and then that was it.
What happened to her?
That's when she got shot. She had to go down the stairs, and I dropped the gun.
Right.
That's when the kid was standing right there.
Talking on the phone?
Yep.
Okay, so you dropped the gun, and then it went off?
Yep.
Okay. Did you see it hit the kid?
Huh? No.
Alex was shot 3 times. Dropping the gun, it didn't go off 3 times. And if it did, it would be 1 time, not 3 times. It's a pump shotgun. It doesn't work that way.
I don't believe that there's a struggle. We have 3 people who've been shot, a couple of them more than 1 time. So the idea that this was just an unfortunate accident just doesn't fly whatsoever. Both of us felt like we had enough at that point. We placed him under arrest pending criminal charges for murder.
I don't think he ever wanted to admit that he intentionally shot and killed anybody. He wasn't going to go there. But there's evidence left all over that crime scene. There's evidence on him, and we're going to find it.
We had now spent the previous day and into the night processing the scene, gathering information. We determined that there had been 8 rounds fired, which even further dismisses this idea that this was just an unfortunate accident. And then we learned from the autopsy of Tracy Kruger that a piece of actual spring from the bed mattress and some fibers from the bed mattress were found in his wound in his chest, which told us that he was using that mattress as a type of shield or a way to protect himself from Mr. Zabawa, who's shooting at him.
It just confirmed that there was really no struggle at all there. He was trying to hide from Michael Zabawa at the time.
The guns that were in the house, was there ever a gun in the bedroom? Did you guys keep a gun in the bedroom?
Not that I was aware of.
Okay. Where did Tracy typically keep the guns?
Downstairs.
Okay.
We have a gun safe,
Okay.
but I don't think that they weren't in there
Okay.
because they were needing to be cleaned.
Okay. Would they have been just outside the gun safe downstairs?
Yeah. Some in the gun case with the door open,
Okay.
and some maybe on the floor.
Okay. Would they have been loaded or unloaded, do you think?
Unloaded.
Unloaded. There wouldn't be a loaded gun in the
No.
house? Okay. So this intruder brought the gun upstairs with him, as best as you can tell. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you recall, did Tracy have any struggle with this individual? Did they actually have a physical fight of any kind?
No, I don't think they had a chance.
I wasn't out of the woods for quite a while. It took 2 hospitals, 2 rehabilitation, and 9 months before I was able to come home again.
To find a gun, to load a gun, to walk up the stairs, to start shooting people are all intentional acts. At any of those moments, he could have changed his mind.
There was never any type of struggle. But that was the story that came out first, before anybody was even able to talk with me and get the facts. That upsets me. I know how senseless these murders were.
I think the jury could see that he was lying and untruthful from the beginning. That was very important to show the jury that he wasn't telling the whole truth, and the evidence supported what actually happened.
It was emotional. I testified with Zabawa only a few feet away. But I was just there to do my job and make sure that he didn't get off on this.
He was found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree premeditated murder, which were 2 consecutive life sentences. He got 216 months for Hillary's attempted murder. But he never showed any remorse for any of this, never indicated he felt bad about what he did or provided a logical explanation or anything for it. And I don't think we'll ever know.
It's on my mind every day, but it doesn't control me or define me. It's become part of me.
I don't think we ever try to move past it. There's always a thought there when we're together. We just gotta keep living the best we can.
Tracy and Alec were such good, kind people that their memory deserves us to live our life the best we can. I miss everything about them. I miss their silliness and just being fun and being a family and just having dinners together. I miss their hugs, but I'm happy and thankful and grateful that we did have that time with them. That will always stay in my heart.
It began like so many other nights in Las Vegas, a city that never quite knows how to sleep and never really tries to. The desert air had cooled just enough to make the evening feel comfortable, almost inviting, as if the heat of the day had finally loosened its grip on the pavement and the skin of the city. Neon lights flickered into dominance one by one, painting the skyline in electric color, while inside the casinos and hotels, time dissolved into a blur of noise, laughter, and spinning wheels. Just a few miles off the strip, something different was unfolding. At the Route 91 Harvest Festival, an open-air country music concert space surrounded by the towering silhouettes of hotels and the distant glow of the Las Vegas lights, tens of thousands of people were gathered shoulder to shoulder. Boots pressed into dry ground, plastic cups filled with beer and soda were held high, and music rolled through the air with the kind of warmth that only live performance can create. It was supposed to be the final night of the festival, a closing celebration, the kind of memory people would carry home and talk about for years in small fragments. Remember that night in Vegas? On stage, the performers had no reason to believe anything was wrong. The crowd was alive, responsive, moving like a single organism beneath the glow of stage lights. Phones were raised to capture moments that would later become social media posts, short videos, fading digital echoes of a night that felt infinite in the moment. There was laughter, singing, and the collective rhythm of a crowd unified by sound. And then, at 10:05 p.m., something changed. At first, it was barely noticeable. A sharp, unfamiliar sound cut through the music. Some in the audience thought it might be fireworks, part of the show, or perhaps a mechanical malfunction. In a city like Las Vegas, artificial noise is so common that the brain learns to ignore it, to categorize it as harmless background. But then came another sound, and another, faster now, sharper, more deliberate. The illusion of safety began to fracture in real time. People started to look around. Smiles faded into confusion. Conversations broke mid-sentence. The music from the stage continued, unaware, almost cruelly indifferent to what was beginning to unfold just beyond its reach. Then, recognition arrived in waves, slow at first, then all at once. This was not music. This was not celebration. This was something else entirely. Within seconds, the crowd shifted from joy to instinct. People ran. Not everyone at first. Some stood frozen, unable to process what they were seeing or hearing. Others dropped to the ground, as if instinct alone told them that height made them vulnerable. Then the panic spread like electricity. Chairs were overturned. Bags were abandoned. Shoes were lost in the chaos of movement. The festival, once a carefully contained space of entertainment, dissolved into something unrecognizable. High above them, in a room on the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay Hotel, a man stood near a window. From that elevation, the world below was reduced to patterns and movement, clusters of light and motion. The festival grounds stretched out like a living map. Tiny figures scattered across open space, unaware of how exposed they truly were. The man did not speak. There was no visible emotion from this distance, no theatrical gesture, no declaration of intent. Only focus. Only repetition. What followed would later be described in official reports as a sustained, uninterrupted sequence of gunfire lasting approximately 10 to 11 minutes. But for those on the ground, it did not feel like time measured in minutes. It felt distorted, stretched, compressed, and unreal all at once. Moments slowed, then accelerated. Thoughts fragmented. Survival replaced understanding. Some people tried to help others up. Some shouted instructions that were swallowed by noise and confusion. Others simply ran without direction, driven by a single instinct: get away from the open space. The festival grounds, once designed for visibility and enjoyment, had become a dangerous exposure zone, with nowhere to hide and nowhere to understand what was happening. Inside the hotel, on the other side of the glass, the man continued. Later investigations would reveal that he had positioned multiple firearms in his room. The setup was deliberate, arranged over time, piece by piece, carried in quietly so as not to attract attention. There was no visible chaos in the room itself. No sign of struggle, no evidence of interruption. Everything appeared organized, almost methodical, as if prepared in advance with a clarity that stood in stark contrast to the confusion below. But in those moments, none of that information existed for the people on the ground. They did not know the identity of the source. They did not know the location. They only knew that danger was coming from somewhere above, somewhere unseen, somewhere impossible to immediately escape. Emergency calls began flooding dispatch centers. Confusion dominated the early reports. Some callers described fireworks. Others screamed about an active shooter, but could not provide location details. Police units in the area began moving toward the festival grounds, but the scale of the crowd and the uncertainty of the threat created immediate complications in coordination. And still, the sound continued. Not constant in perception, but persistent enough to keep fear alive in every second. Each pause, each brief silence, was filled with anticipation of the next. People did not yet know when it would stop, or if it would stop at all. That uncertainty became part of the terror itself. On the ground, near the edges of the festival, people began to find any form of cover they could. Cars became shields. Barricades became hiding places. Some ran toward the Las Vegas Strip, believing that distance alone might provide safety. Others collapsed behind temporary structures, unable to move further, overwhelmed by adrenaline and shock. Inside the Mandalay Bay Hotel, other guests were unaware of what was happening just floors above them. The building remained normal in its own strange way. Elevators continued to move. Casino floors remained active. Life, in fragments, continued as if insulated from the violence unfolding within its structure. That contrast would later become one of the most haunting aspects of the night: how two realities could exist simultaneously within the same building, one defined by celebration and routine, the other by destruction and panic. As the minutes passed, law enforcement began narrowing the location of the threat. Reports from witnesses, combined with sound analysis and trajectory information, began pointing upward, toward the hotel. Officers moved through hallways with increasing urgency, their understanding of the situation forming in real time, piece by piece, as they climbed closer to the source. But by the time they reached the correct floor, the most intense phase of the event was already nearing its end. Inside the room, the man ceased fire shortly before officers entered. What followed was silence, sudden and absolute, broken only by the sound of approaching footsteps and forced entry. When officers breached the door, they encountered a scene that would later be described in investigative detail, but never fully understood in emotional terms. The man was no longer alive. Outside, below, the aftermath had already begun. The soundscape shifted from immediate danger to confusion, then to cries for help, then to the distant arrival of emergency sirens. People searched for friends. Some held strangers who were injured. Others simply sat in shock, unable to process the scale of what had just occurred. It would take time before the full scope became clear. Time before numbers were confirmed. Time before names of victims were released. Time before the city, and the country, began to understand that this was not a contained incident, but something unprecedented in its scale within a single location. In the hours that followed, Las Vegas would transform from a city of entertainment into a center of national emergency response. Hospitals would overflow. Roads would close. Families across the country would begin searching for loved ones who had attended a concert that had ended in a way no one could have imagined. But in those first minutes, none of that existed yet. Only fragments did. Sound. Movement. Fear. Confusion. And the lingering question that hung over everything like smoke in the air: how could something like this happen here, in a place designed entirely for spectacle and escape? The answer would not come quickly. And for many, it would never come at all. Las Vegas has always existed as a contradiction. It is a city built on illusion, yet it functions with mechanical precision beneath its glittering surface. To the casual observer, it is a place of escape, where time dissolves into entertainment and consequence feels temporarily suspended. But beneath the neon and music, it is also a tightly engineered system of logistics, surveillance, architecture, and human flow, designed to contain chaos rather than eliminate it. On the surface, the Strip appears endless in its invitation. Hotels rise like artificial mountains, each one trying to outdo the other in scale, brightness, and spectacle. Waterfalls are manufactured to fall on cue. Indoor skies remain permanently blue regardless of the desert outside. Inside casinos, windows are often absent by design, removing the passage of natural light, so that guests lose all sense of time. The city is not simply a destination. It is an environment constructed to suspend reality. The Mandalay Bay Resort and Casino stands as one of these engineered worlds. Located on the southern end of the Las Vegas Strip, it is both a luxury hotel and a self-contained ecosystem. Its gold-tinted glass exterior reflects the desert sun during the day and the city lights at night, creating a shifting identity depending on the hour. Inside, the structure is layered with convention halls, restaurants, pools, entertainment venues, and thousands of hotel rooms stacked vertically like compartments in a vast machine. It is the kind of place where anonymity is not only possible but expected. Guests arrive and leave constantly. Luggage rolls across polished floors without attachment. Elevators move people between floors where identities blur into room numbers. In such a system, presence is temporary by design. Even long-term guests can feel invisible within its corridors. On the grounds, just beyond the hotel's reach, the Route 91 Harvest Festival occupied a different kind of space. Unlike the controlled interior of Mandalay Bay, the festival was open to the sky. It was held on a patch of land adjacent to the Strip, where temporary fencing, portable stages, and lighting structures transformed an empty lot into a gathering place for music and celebration. Country music festivals carry their own cultural rhythm. They are built around familiarity, storytelling, and shared emotional language. Attendees often arrive in groups, wearing clothing that signals identity and belonging. Cowboy hats, boots, denim, and flags become part of the visual landscape. There is an intentional informality to it all, a sense that the environment is safe enough for relaxation and communal enjoyment. For 3 days leading up to October 1, 2017, the festival followed this rhythm. Each afternoon, crowds gathered under the Nevada sun, and each evening, they remained under artificial light that extended the day far beyond its natural limits. The stage became a focal point where performers and audience merged into a shared emotional current. Songs about home, loss, love, and resilience carried across the open space, reinforced by amplifiers and collective memory. The city of Las Vegas itself surrounded this temporary world like a constant pulse. Just beyond the festival perimeter, traffic moved steadily along Las Vegas Boulevard. Tourists walked between hotels, unaware of the precise layout of events happening just a short distance away. From a distance, everything appeared connected, yet compartmentalized. Each space had its own logic, its own purpose, its own rules. Inside Mandalay Bay, daily operations continued without disruption in the hours leading up to the event that would later define it. Guests checked in at the front desk, received room keys, and were directed toward elevators that would carry them upward into private corridors. Casino floors remained active with the familiar rhythm of chants. Restaurants served meals to travelers and locals alike. Security systems monitored movement throughout the building, recording but not interpreting the flow of human activity. High above the festival grounds, one particular room in the hotel existed as part of this larger system. It was a standard suite, designed for comfort and privacy, with large windows that offered a direct view outward across the cityscape and down toward the open field below. From that height, the festival grounds were visible as a broad geometric space, filled with movement during events and empty during off hours. The hotel itself, like many in Las Vegas, was designed with layered access. Public areas were separated from private corridors. Service routes allowed for the discreet movement of staff and supplies. Elevators were programmed to manage large volumes of guests efficiently, while maintaining a sense of exclusivity on upper floors. In this structure, isolation and accessibility coexisted in carefully balanced tension. Stephen Paddock, the man who would later become central to the events of October 1st, had been a guest in this system. To those who interacted with him in passing, he did not stand out in any obvious way. He moved through the same spaces as thousands of others, lobbies, elevators, hallways. His presence was recorded in transactional terms, as all guests are, but not in a way that suggested disruption. Las Vegas, by its nature, is a place where people can disappear into crowds. This is part of its appeal. It is a city that allows individuals to step outside their ordinary identities, even if only temporarily. For most, this means entertainment and anonymity. For the city itself, it means managing an enormous flow of unpredictable human behavior without allowing it to destabilize the system. The festival crowd on October 1st represented a concentrated version of this unpredictability. Tens of thousands of people gathered in a confined outdoor space, their attention directed toward a single stage. Energy moved outward from the performers into the audience and back again, creating a feedback loop of sound and emotion. Security personnel monitored entry points, checked bags, and managed crowd density, but the scale of participation made complete visibility impossible. Beyond the festival perimeter, the city continued its parallel existence. Tourists walked along pedestrian bridges that connected hotels across busy streets. Rideshare vehicles navigated traffic patterns designed to handle constant congestion. Inside the casinos, the absence of clocks and windows maintained a psychological separation from the outside world. It was possible, even common, for individuals to spend hours inside without fully registering the passage of time. This separation is one of the defining characteristics of Las Vegas. It is a city built in layers of perception, where interior and exterior realities operate independently while remaining physically adjacent. A person can stand on a balcony and see both celebration and stillness at once. They can hear music from one direction and silence from another. The boundaries are not physical so much as experimental. In the hours before the incident, nothing in the environment indicated disruption. Weather conditions remained stable. The desert air cooled gradually as evening approached. Visibility across the open festival grounds was clear, allowing the stage lighting and crowd movement to dominate the visual field. From a distance, the city skyline formed a static backdrop, unchanged by the human activity below. Inside the hotel, routine continued. Housekeeping moved through scheduled tasks. Guests arrived for evening check-ins. Security personnel monitored cameras positioned throughout the building. These systems, while extensive, functioned primarily as observation tools rather than predictive ones. They recorded behavior without assigning meaning unless patterns were already known to be significant. The architecture of Mandalay Bay, like many large resort complexes, encourages vertical separation. Lower floors are more public, more active, more fluid. Higher floors become increasingly private, with longer corridors and reduced foot traffic. The uppermost levels offer a sense of distance from the city, even while remaining structurally part of it. From these heights, the boundary between inside and outside becomes visual rather than physical. The festival grounds below, in contrast, were horizontal and exposed. There were no enclosing walls, only barriers designed to guide entry and exit. The openness of the space was intentional, meant to create freedom of movement and visibility for attendees. This design, however, also meant that there were few natural protections against external forces beyond the perimeter. As night settled fully over Las Vegas, the contrast between these two environments became more pronounced. The hotel glowed with controlled illumination, each window a contained rectangle of light. The festival field, meanwhile, pulsed with collective energy, its brightness concentrated around the stage and diffusing outward into darkness. At the intersection of these spaces stood distance, both physical and perceptual. A few hundred feet separated the elevated hotel rooms from the open field below, yet within that distance existed entirely different realities. One was structured, enclosed, and segmented. The other was open, communal, and fluid. It was within this convergence of environments that the events of October 1st would unfold. But in the hours leading up to it, nothing in the setting revealed what was coming. The city remained itself, layered, luminous, and indifferent to the invisible tensions that would soon disrupt its carefully maintained illusion of control. To understand what was lost on the night of October 1st, 2017, it is not enough to speak in numbers. 60 lives ended. More than 800 were wounded. But behind every figure was a person who had made a simple decision that day, to go to a concert, to stand in an open field under the night sky, to listen to music with friends, partners, family, or even alone. Each of them carried an ordinary life into an extraordinary moment, unaware that the two would collide in a way that would permanently divide their existence into before and after. Many of those present at the Route 91 Harvest Festival had spent the day like any other festival day in Las Vegas. Some had traveled long distances, crossing state lines, planning their trip months in advance. Others were locals, familiar with the city's rhythm, choosing to spend their weekend immersed in live music. There were couples celebrating anniversaries, groups of friends marking reunions, parents attending with adult children, and individuals seeking a brief escape from routines that often felt too heavy or too repetitive. The openness of the festival space encouraged connection. Strangers became temporary companions, sharing drinks, conversations, and songs. People took photos for memories they intended to revisit later. Phones captured laughter, sunsets, and the glow of stage lights reflecting off faces turned upward toward the performers. For many, it was not just an event, but a moment of emotional release, a rare pause in lives defined by work, responsibility, and uncertainty. Among the crowd were people who had come for the experience of country music itself. The genre often carries themes of home, hardship, love, and resilience, and those themes were reflected in the audience. Some attendees sang along with familiar lyrics, voices blending with thousands of others. There was a shared understanding in that space, even among strangers, that music could hold pain and joy at the same time. As the evening progressed, the festival reached its emotional peak. The headlining performance drew the largest concentration of attendees close to the stage. People stood shoulder to shoulder, their attention unified, their surroundings temporarily forgotten. The outside world, with its concerns and unpredictability, felt distant and irrelevant. In those moments, the only reality that mattered was the present one: sound, light, and shared experience. When the first signs of danger appeared, confusion replaced that unity almost instantly. Many people did not understand what was happening in those initial seconds. The human mind, when confronted with sudden disruption in a context of celebration, often searches for familiar explanations. Some thought it was part of the show. Others assumed technical malfunction, or distant noise unrelated to their immediate environment. That uncertainty delayed recognition long enough for fear to take root in its most chaotic form. As understanding spread, it did so unevenly. In one area of the field, people were still filming the stage, unaware of the shift occurring nearby. In another, individuals had already begun to run, pulling friends and strangers with them. Somewhere between those two states, disbelief collapsed into urgency, and urgency into survival instinct. Families became separated in seconds. Friends lost sight of each other in the movement of bodies. Some people fell and were helped up by those around them, while others could not be reached in time. The openness of the venue, which had once felt liberating, now offered no protection. There were few fixed reference points, few structures to hide behind, and limited direction in which to move safely. For those who were injured in the initial chaos, the experience was disorienting and fragmented. Some recalled the shock of impact followed by silence in their immediate perception, replaced by distant noise and blurred movement. Others remembered only confusion, the sensation of being on the ground without understanding how they got there. Medical response in such conditions is always complicated by scale, and in this case, the sheer number of people requiring assistance quickly overwhelmed immediate capacity. Bystanders became first responders. People with no medical training attempted to apply pressure to wounds, to carry others away from exposed areas, to create space in environments that offered none. Clothing was used as makeshift bandages. Doors of vehicles were opened to transport the wounded. Strangers held hands with strangers, offering grounding in a moment when stability had collapsed entirely. Inside that field, identity began to dissolve into role. People were no longer defined by their backgrounds or reasons for attending the concert. They were defined by what they could do in the moment: run, help, call, carry, or remain still. The ordinary distinctions that structured daily life became irrelevant in the face of immediate survival. Outside the festival grounds, families began to receive fragmented information. Phone calls went unanswered. Text messages remained unread. Social media began to fill with confusion, concern, and early reports that were often incomplete or inaccurate. For those waiting for confirmation, time stretched in painful uncertainty. The absence of information became its own form of distress, as imagination filled gaps that reality had not yet clarified. Hospitals across Las Vegas activated emergency protocols. Ambulances arrived in waves, transporting the injured in rapid succession. Medical staff prepared for volume that exceeded normal capacity, converting waiting areas into treatment zones and coordinating across departments to manage influx. The severity of injuries varied widely, but the emotional weight of each case remained constant for those providing care. In the hours that followed, identification of victims began slowly. Names were not immediately available for all, and families often learned information through indirect channels before official confirmation. The process of recognition became a secondary trauma layered onto the first, as loved ones navigated between hope and acceptance in real time. What made the impact of the event particularly profound was its randomness. There was no pattern that explained who was affected and who was not. Friends standing side by side experienced entirely different outcomes. Couples were separated in irreversible ways. Entire groups who had arrived together found themselves scattered across hospitals, shelters, and search lists. This absence of logic intensified the sense of collective grief, as it removed any illusion of predictability or fairness. For survivors, the psychological aftermath began almost immediately, though its full weight would take longer to surface. Many described a sense of disbelief that persisted even after physical safety had been restored. The transition from celebration to crisis had been so abrupt that the mind struggled to reconcile the two realities. The memory of music, lights, and laughter remained vividly present, existing alongside the memory of chaos and fear. In the days that followed, stories began to emerge. Accounts from those who had helped others. Messages from individuals who had located friends after hours of uncertainty. Tributes to those who did not survive. Each narrative added detail to a larger picture that was still incomplete, still forming, still being understood. But even as information accumulated, one truth remained unchanged. The people at the center of this event had not gathered with expectation of harm. They had come for a shared cultural experience, for music, for connection, for a night that would feel memorable in a positive way. That expectation had shaped every decision leading up to that moment, from purchasing tickets to choosing where to stand in the crowd. The disruption of that expectation is part of what made the event so deeply impactful. It was not only the physical harm that defined the tragedy, but the collapse of assumed safety within a familiar social experience. Concerts, festivals, and public gatherings carry an implicit understanding that participation, while not risk-free, exists within boundaries of protection and control. That understanding was fundamentally broken. In the aftermath, communities across the country responded with mourning, reflection, and support. Vigils were held. Names were spoken aloud. Candles were lit in public spaces far from Las Vegas, connecting distant places through shared grief. For many, the event became more than a news story. It became a point of emotional reference, a reminder of vulnerability in spaces once considered safe. Yet even as public attention eventually shifted, the impact on those directly affected remained. For families of victims, life continued in a new form defined by absence. For survivors, ordinary environments could no longer be experienced in the same way without echoes of that night. And for the broader public, the event left behind a lingering awareness that large gatherings carry both celebration and fragility within the same space. The victim's story, in its fullest sense, is not only about the final moments of that night. It is about everything that led people to be there, everything they carried with them into that space, and everything that continued afterward in their absence or survival. It is a story built from ordinary lives intersecting with an extraordinary rupture, leaving behind a silence that still resonates long after the music stopped. At 10:05 p.m., the night changed shape without warning, as if reality itself had been quietly rewritten in an instant no one could see coming. One moment the Route 91 Harvest Festival was a living, breathing celebration of sound and light, and the next it began to fracture into confusion that spread faster than understanding. What happened next would later be described in technical terms, analyzed through timelines and ballistic reports, but for those present it unfolded as something far more chaotic and incomprehensible, a collapse of certainty that the human mind struggled to process in real time. From the perspective of the crowd, the first disruptions were ambiguous. In a space filled with amplified music, distant noise is often absorbed into the atmosphere without recognition. The festival was already saturated with sound, and Las Vegas itself is a city where unusual noise is part of the background rhythm of life. That familiarity created a dangerous delay in perception. People did not immediately identify the source or meaning of what they were hearing. Some turned their heads, searching for explanation, while others continued filming, dancing, or singing, still anchored in the expectation that the night belonged to celebration. But perception is fragile when it is forced to confront something that does not fit its context. Within seconds, that ambiguity gave way to recognition in scattered pockets of the crowd. Individuals began to react differently depending on their proximity, their angle, and their instinctive interpretation of what they were witnessing. Some dropped instinctively to the ground. Others began to run without direction. A few remained frozen, caught in the gap between disbelief and action, as if waiting for confirmation that never came. The stage, still illuminated and active, continued its performance briefly, unaware of the shift occurring beyond the reach of its immediate focus. The performers themselves were initially shielded by the structure of the event, separated from the full reality unfolding in the crowd. That separation created a surreal contrast between two simultaneous experiences, one of entertainment and one of survival, existing side by side in the same physical space, but no longer aligned in meaning. As awareness spread, it did so unevenly and unpredictably. In one section of the field, people began to move en masse, pushing outward toward exits and barriers. In another, confusion persisted longer, delaying reaction and increasing vulnerability. The crowd, once unified by music, fragmented into individual survival responses. Human movement became erratic, shaped not by planning but by instinct, fear, and incomplete information. Within moments, the structure of the festival space itself became a challenge. Designed for entry and enjoyment rather than emergency dispersal, the layout offered limited pathways for rapid evacuation. Narrow exits became congested as thousands attempted to leave simultaneously. Temporary fencing, intended to guide flow, now constrained it. The open field, once a symbol of freedom and visibility, transformed into a landscape of uncertainty where direction was no longer intuitive. Amid this unfolding chaos, communication collapsed into fragments. Phone calls were attempted but often failed due to network congestion. Text messages were sent but not always received. Social media became both a tool for connection and a source of confusion, as incomplete information circulated rapidly without verification. People attempted to locate loved ones, but physical separation, combined with environmental disorder, made reunion increasingly difficult in the immediate moment. On the ground, survival decisions became immediate and often irrational under pressure. Some individuals chose to run toward perceived cover, even if it offered no real protection. Others sought shelter behind vehicles, equipment, or any solid object available. A few attempted to assist those who had fallen, creating improvised chains of aid in conditions that continued to deteriorate. In such environments, human behavior oscillates between self-preservation and collective instinct, often without conscious deliberation. The soundscape of the festival, once dominated by structured music and performance, dissolved into overlapping layers of panic and confusion. The absence of clarity in what people were hearing contributed to the difficulty of understanding scale and direction. Without clear visual confirmation of the source, Many were forced to rely on fragmented cues, interpreting danger through movement, reaction, and the behavior of those around them. Above the field, the city of Las Vegas continued to exist in parallel, largely unaware of the full magnitude of what was unfolding just beyond its immediate attention. Traffic lights cycled through patterns of normal operation. Hotel windows reflected the city's ambient glow. Inside nearby buildings, guests remained engaged in unrelated activities, insulated by distance and structure from the disruption occurring outside. Inside the Mandalay Bay Hotel, operations continued in a similarly fragmented state. Staff moved through corridors performing routine duties. Guests occupied rooms without awareness of the situation developing several floors below, or within view of their building. The architecture of the hotel, designed to compartmentalize experience, unintentionally reinforced separation between events occurring simultaneously within the same structure. As minutes passed, the situation on the ground intensified in complexity. Emergency response units began to arrive, but their movement was shaped by uncertainty regarding the precise nature and location of the threat. Large crowds, obstructed visibility, and ongoing panic created conditions that complicated immediate coordination. First responders faced the dual challenge of reaching injured individuals, while also attempting to understand the scope of the incident in real time. In the absence of complete information, assumptions were made based on emerging patterns. Reports from witnesses indicated that the origin of danger was elevated, leading attention upward toward surrounding structures. This directional understanding began to focus response efforts toward the adjacent hotel complex, though clarity developed gradually rather than instantaneously. For those still inside the festival area, time became distorted. The duration of the incident, later measured in minutes, felt significantly longer to those experiencing it directly. Each moment carried heightened awareness and uncertainty, creating a psychological stretching of time that is common in high-stress environments. Events that occur in rapid sequence are often remembered as prolonged and fragmented due to the intensity of perception. The crowd's movement continued to evolve as pathways opened and closed unpredictably. Some individuals reached perimeters and escaped into surrounding streets, where the contrast between chaos and normal urban activity created further disorientation. Others remained trapped within denser sections of the field, still attempting to navigate toward exits that were not immediately accessible. The lack of clear directional control transformed movement into improvisation. Injuries occurred not only from direct impact, but also from the conditions of panic itself. Falls, collisions, and crowd pressure contributed to harm as individuals attempted to move simultaneously through constrained spaces. Emergency response on the ground quickly adapted to prioritize triage, stabilization, and evacuation, with improvised medical support emerging from both professionals and civilians. Throughout this period, the psychological state of those present shifted rapidly between acute fear and disassociation. Some described a sense of detachment from their surroundings, as if observing events from a distance rather than participating in them directly. Others experienced heightened sensory awareness, where every movement and sound felt amplified beyond normal perception. These variations in response reflected the human nervous system's unpredictable adaptation to extreme stress. As the incident progressed, the initial confusion began to give way to structured response efforts. Law enforcement units coordinated movement toward the source of reported danger, while medical teams established triage zones outside the immediate area. Communication systems gradually improved as information became more centralized, though the process remained uneven and reactive. Inside the festival grounds, the density of movement began to decrease as more individuals reached exits or moved beyond the immediate area of danger. However, the aftermath within the space itself remained chaotic, marked by scattered belongings, abandoned objects, and individuals still seeking assistance. The physical environment bore visible traces of rapid displacement, reflecting the intensity of the preceding minutes. By the time the most critical phase of the incident came to an end, the transformation of the space was complete. A venue designed for celebration had become a site of emergency response, marked by urgency, coordination, and uncertainty. The transition between these two states occurred without warning, without preparation, and without the ability for those present to fully comprehend it as it unfolded. What remained in the immediate aftermath was not clarity, but fragmentation. People separated from each other. Information still incomplete. Emergency systems still adapting. And a city that, for a brief but defining period, had experienced a rupture in its carefully maintained balance between spectacle and safety. In the immediate aftermath of the chaos, before the full scale of the tragedy was officially understood, Las Vegas entered a state of controlled emergency. What had begun as confusion on the ground rapidly evolved into a coordinated response effort that stretched across multiple agencies, hospitals, and command centers. Yet even with systems activated and resources mobilized, the reality of what had happened was still being pieced together from fragments of incomplete information. The first priority was location. Emergency responders arriving near the Route 91 Harvest Festival were confronted with a scene that did not immediately resolve into a single clear narrative. People were moving in multiple directions, some fleeing the area entirely, others searching for friends or family, and many attempting to assist those who were injured. The absence of a clearly visible source of danger made initial assessment difficult. There was no obvious single point of impact in the field itself, no centralized physical collapse, only the scattered evidence of panic and sudden displacement. Witness accounts began to converge on one consistent detail: the origin of the threat appeared to be elevated. Multiple individuals reported that the sound had come from above, or from a distant vertical direction, rather than from within the crowd. This observation became critical in narrowing the scope of the investigation in its earliest stage. In a city dominated by tall structures, elevation was not an unusual feature, but in this context it became the defining clue. Attention quickly shifted toward surrounding buildings, particularly those with direct line of sight to the festival grounds. The Mandalay Bay Resort and Casino, positioned adjacent to the event area, became a focal point of concern. Its towering structure overlooked the open field where thousands had gathered, and its height provided a clear visual dominance over the surrounding environment. Within minutes, law enforcement units began moving toward the hotel, initiating a rapid search of its upper floors. Inside the building, the situation was initially indistinguishable from normal operations. Guests remained in their rooms, unaware of the precise nature of events unfolding outside, or within other parts of the structure. Hallways were still lit with ambient hotel lighting. Elevators continued to function. The casino floor maintained its rhythm of activity, separated by architectural layers from the emergency developing above. As officers moved through the building, coordination became increasingly focused. Floor-by-floor assessments began, with priority given to upper levels that aligned with witness descriptions. Communication between units intensified, and the tone of operations shifted from general response to targeted search. The hotel, normally a space of leisure and anonymity, transformed into a controlled environment of urgent investigation. On the 32nd floor, the focus of attention narrowed further. Officers approached a corridor that led to a specific set of rooms overlooking the festival grounds. At this stage, the information was still partial, shaped by urgency rather than full confirmation. What they encountered upon entry would later become one of the central points of reconstruction in the official timeline. Inside the room, the scene reflected preparation rather than improvisation. The layout suggested deliberate arrangement of objects over time. Multiple items were positioned near the windows, oriented outward toward the direction of the festival. The visual field from that vantage point extended across the entire open area below, offering a clear line of sight to the location where thousands of people had gathered only minutes earlier. There was no immediate movement inside the room at the moment of entry. The environment was static, in stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded below. The silence within that space stood in contrast to the urgency that had brought officers there. Everything appeared contained within its own boundary, isolated from the external disorder that had just been experienced. As the search continued, it became evident that the room had been used in a sustained and organized manner over time. Evidence indicated that materials had been brought in gradually rather than all at once, suggesting planning that extended beyond a single moment or impulse. The arrangement of objects, the positioning of equipment, and the overall structure of the space reflected intentional preparation. At this stage of discovery, however, interpretation remained limited. Officers were still in the process of securing the area, documenting conditions, and ensuring that no additional threats were present. The priority was containment and stabilization rather than immediate analysis. The broader implications of what had been found would only emerge through subsequent investigation. Outside the hotel, the scale of the incident was becoming clearer as reports consolidated. Emergency medical teams were managing a rapidly growing number of casualties, transporting injured individuals to hospitals across the city. Triage areas were established in nearby zones, where patients were assessed based on severity and urgency. The flow of information between field responders and command centers gradually improved, though it remained uneven due to the evolving nature of the situation. The discovery within the hotel marked a turning point in understanding. What had initially been treated as an active, ongoing threat was now transitioning into a concluded event with a defined origin point. The focus of response shifted from immediate neutralization to investigation and documentation. This shift allowed for the beginning of structured analysis, even as emotional and logistical challenges continued to unfold across the city. Outside, survivors of the festival were being directed to safe locations. Many were gathered in nearby buildings, parking areas, and temporary shelters. Identification and reunification efforts began almost immediately, though the scale of separation made the process slow and emotionally difficult. Individuals who had been together only moments earlier now found themselves in entirely different environments, uncertain of each other's condition or location. Hospitals continued to receive a steady influx of patients. Medical teams worked under conditions of sustained pressure, balancing urgency with triage protocols. The range of injuries varied significantly, requiring rapid adaptation and resource allocation. Staff from multiple facilities were mobilized to assist, creating a citywide response network that extended beyond standard operational capacity. As night progressed, the physical environment of Las Vegas began to shift from emergency activity toward structured containment. Road closures remained in place. Security perimeters were established. Communication centers coordinated the flow of verified information to the public. In parallel, families across the country continued to search for confirmation, relying on fragmented updates and official statements that were still being compiled. Within the Mandalay Bay Hotel, the process of securing and examining the upper floors continued. Investigative teams began to document the contents of the room in detail, recording spatial arrangements, collecting physical evidence, and establishing preliminary timelines based on available indicators. Each element of the environment was treated as part of a larger reconstruction effort aimed at understanding how the events had been carried out. Despite the technical nature of the investigation, the emotional weight of the discovery was unavoidable. The contrast between the room's stillness and the magnitude of what had occurred outside created a dissonance that would later become central to public understanding of the case. The space itself became a point of reference, not only for its physical characteristics, but for what it represented in relation to the events below. As the initial phase of discovery concluded, attention began to shift toward broader questions. How had such extensive preparation gone unnoticed within a highly monitored environment? What systems of oversight had been in place, and where had they failed to detect indicators that might have altered the outcome? These questions would form the basis of subsequent investigation, policy review, and public debate. But in those first hours, clarity remained limited. The city was still processing the immediate consequences of the event. Survivors were still being located. Families were still awaiting answers. And investigators were still working to transform fragmented scenes into coherent understanding. What had been discovered on the 32nd floor was not yet fully interpreted, but it had already changed the nature of the response. It marked the transition from confusion to structure, from reaction to investigation, and from uncertainty to the beginning of explanation. In the hours after the immediate danger had ended, Las Vegas shifted into a different kind of intensity, one defined not by panic, but by precision. The city that had just absorbed one of the most devastating mass casualty events in modern American history now became the center of an enormous investigative operation. Every available federal, state, and local resource was activated, converging on a single objective: to reconstruct exactly what had happened, how it had been executed, and why it had occurred at all. The first phase of the investigation was dominated by urgency. The scene at the Mandalay Bay Hotel was secured, and the room from which the attack originated became the primary focus of forensic examination. Investigators moved carefully through the space, aware that every object, every surface, and every trace of residue could hold significance. The environment itself was treated as a frozen moment in time, preserved for analysis before it could be altered by external interference or natural decay. Outside the hotel, a perimeter was established that extended across multiple floors and access points. The building, normally associated with leisure and entertainment, was transformed into a controlled investigative zone. Entry and exit were restricted, and movement within the upper levels was carefully managed. What had once been a space of private occupancy now functioned as a structured crime scene, dissected by teams trained to interpret physical evidence under extreme conditions. Inside the room, investigators began documenting the spatial arrangement in detail. The positioning of objects near the windows drew immediate attention due to its alignment with the direction of the festival grounds. This line of sight became a central element in reconstructing the mechanics of the event. The geometry of the space, the angle of elevation, and the distance to the open field below were all recorded and later analyzed to understand how the environment had been utilized. As the physical examination progressed, attention expanded beyond the immediate room to include surrounding areas, service corridors, and adjacent suites. Investigators sought to determine whether any external assistance had been involved, or whether any communication had occurred between the individual in the room and other parties. Every possible connection was explored, from digital records to hotel logs and surveillance systems. At the same time, digital forensics teams began their work. Electronic devices recovered from the scene were secured for analysis, with the goal of reconstructing communication patterns, search histories, and potential planning behavior. This phase of the investigation was particularly sensitive, as it required careful extraction of data without altering its integrity. The objective was not only to identify actions, but to establish a timeline that could explain how those actions developed over time. Outside the hotel, witness interviews became a critical source of information. Survivors, bystanders, and first responders provided accounts that varied in detail but converged on key points. These testimonies helped establish the sequence of events from the perspective of those on the ground. Although individual memories differed due to stress and confusion, patterns emerged that allowed investigators to map the progression of the incident in real time. One of the most consistent findings from early interviews was the absence of any clear warning prior to the event. There were no widely recognized indicators among attendees that suggested imminent danger. This lack of forewarning became an important element in understanding the nature of the attack, particularly in relation to how quickly the situation escalated from normal activity to mass emergency. As the investigation expanded, attention turned toward the background of the individual identified as responsible. Federal agencies conducted a comprehensive review of personal history, financial records, travel patterns, and social connections. The objective was to determine whether there were external influences, affiliations, or ideological motivations that could explain the actions taken. Despite extensive examination, no clear organizational link or declared ideological framework was immediately identified. This absence of an obvious motive introduced a significant challenge for investigators. In many cases involving mass violence, patterns of communication or association provide context that helps explain intent. In this case, however, those patterns were not readily visible. The lack of a clear ideological or political anchor made the interpretive process more complex, requiring a deeper focus on behavioral analysis and psychological profiling. Behavioral specialists were brought in to assist with constructing a profile based on available evidence. This included examining patterns of isolation, planning behavior, and logistical preparation. The goal was to understand not only what had occurred, but how it had been conceptualized and executed from a behavioral standpoint. These analyses focused on consistency, repetition, and methodical organization within the available data. At the same time, investigators worked to reconstruct the timeline leading up to the event. This involved reviewing hotel records, transportation data, surveillance footage, and financial transactions. Each piece of information contributed to a broader framework designed to establish when specific actions had taken place and how they aligned with the final sequence of events on October 1st. One of the key challenges in this phase was the gradual nature of preparation. Evidence suggested that materials had been accumulated over an extended period rather than acquired in a single moment. This required investigators to expand the timeline backward, identifying patterns that may not have appeared significant in isolation, but gained relevance when viewed collectively. As federal and local agencies coordinated their efforts, communication between departments became essential. Information had to be shared rapidly, but accurately, with multiple teams working on different aspects of the same case simultaneously. Coordination centers were established to ensure that findings from forensic analysis, digital investigation, and field interviews were integrated into a unified working model. Public communication also became a critical component of the investigation. Authorities faced the challenge of providing accurate information to a global audience while still in the early stages of understanding. Statements released during this period were carefully constructed to balance transparency with caution, reflecting the evolving nature of the findings. As days passed, the scale of the investigative effort expanded further. Federal agencies deployed additional resources to assist with data analysis, behavioral modeling, and evidence correlation. Laboratories processed physical materials recovered from the scene, while analysts worked to align those findings with digital and testimonial evidence. Despite the vast amount of information collected, certain aspects of the case remained unresolved. The absence of a clearly articulated motive continued to stand at the center of public and investigative focus. Without a definitive explanation for intent, the case required a shift from traditional causation models toward more complex interpretations of behavior, circumstance, and individual psychology. This complexity also influenced how the investigation was received publicly. In the absence of simple answers, speculation emerged in multiple directions. However, official investigative teams remained focused on evidence-based conclusions, resisting premature interpretation in favor of methodical verification. Within the broader context of law enforcement analysis, the case began to be studied as an example of unprecedented scale in a single location civilian mass casualty event in the United States. This classification carried implications not only for investigative procedure, but also for future policy considerations related to public safety, event security, and emergency response coordination. As the initial phase of the investigation concluded, a foundational understanding began to emerge. The sequence of events had been reconstructed in outline form. The physical mechanics of the incident had been established with reasonable clarity. However, the underlying motivation remained uncertain, leaving a critical gap in the overall narrative. The investigation, therefore, transitioned into a longer-term phase focused on deeper analysis. This included continued behavioral study, cross-referencing of datasets, and ongoing review of all collected evidence. The objective was no longer immediate reconstruction, but comprehensive understanding. What remained clear, even in the early stages, was that the event had been the result of extensive planning executed within a controlled environment, using available infrastructure, in a highly deliberate manner. Beyond that, the investigation entered a space defined not by certainty, but by the careful pursuit of explanation in the absence of easy answers. In most complex investigations, breakthroughs arrive as single, dramatic revelations that suddenly reframe everything that came before. In the Las Vegas case, there was no such moment. Instead, understanding emerged gradually, like light spreading through a room one corner at a time. Piece by piece, investigators began to assemble a structure of explanation that, while never fully complete, started to give shape to what had previously been only fragmentation and uncertainty. The first significant shift came not from a single discovery, but from the accumulation of verified data across multiple channels. Forensic teams had completed initial examinations of the hotel room, digital analysts had begun reconstructing electronic activity, and field investigators had gathered hundreds of witness statements. When these streams of information were compared, consistent patterns began to appear, not in terms of motive, but in terms of behavior and preparation. One of the earliest clarifications involved timing. Surveillance footage from the Mandalay Bay Hotel, combined with keycard access records, allowed investigators to reconstruct movement patterns over several days leading up to October 1st. These records indicated repeated presence in the room and consistent activity that aligned with preparation rather than spontaneity. The behavior, when viewed chronologically, suggested deliberate staging over time, with actions distributed across multiple visits rather than concentrated in a single event. This finding shifted the investigative focus away from immediate triggers and toward long-term behavioral planning. It suggested that the event was not the result of a sudden decision, but rather the culmination of an extended process. That realization altered the entire framework of analysis, requiring investigators to expand their timeline backward significantly further than initially assumed. At the same time, digital forensics began to yield additional insight. Electronic devices recovered from the scene revealed patterns of usage that, while not directly explanatory in terms of intent, contributed to a broader understanding of cognitive and logistical preparation. Search histories, file access patterns, and communication records were analyzed for contextual relevance. Although no single element provided a definitive answer, the aggregation of data points helped build a profile of methodical organization. Another important development came from financial analysis. Bank records and transaction histories were reviewed to determine whether external funding sources, unusual expenditures, or financial stressors had played a role in shaping behavior. The results indicated stability rather than instability. There were no obvious signs of financial crisis, sudden wealth shifts, or external pressure that might typically be associated with impulsive large-scale actions. This finding added to the growing complexity of the case, as it removed one of the more common explanatory frameworks used in similar investigations. Meanwhile, behavioral specialists continued to refine their assessment of the individual's psychological profile. This process relied heavily on indirect evidence, including travel patterns, social interactions, and observed habits over time. The absence of clear ideological statements or publicly expressed grievances made interpretation more difficult. Instead of focusing on declared intent, analysts turned to structural behavior, isolation, routine, control over environment, and repetition. One of the most striking observations was the apparent emphasis on preparation without external engagement. Investigators noted that there was little evidence of communication suggesting collaboration or ideological alignment. This reinforced earlier conclusions that the event had been carried out independently, without identifiable organizational involvement. While this clarified certain aspects of responsibility, it did not address the underlying question of motivation. As the investigation progressed, attention also turned toward logistical details surrounding the acquisition and movement of materials. Through hotel records and surveillance analysis, investigators reconstructed how items had been transported into the building over time. This process revealed a pattern of gradual accumulation rather than single-point introduction, suggesting a deliberate effort to avoid detection by distributing activity across multiple instances. This discovery represented a critical turning point in understanding operational behavior. It demonstrated not only planning, but an awareness of environmental constraints and surveillance systems. The methodical nature of these actions indicated a level of foresight that extended beyond immediate execution, reinforcing the conclusion that the event had been structured over a significant period. Despite these advancements, the question of motivation remained unresolved. This absence became increasingly central to both investigative and public discourse. In most cases of mass violence, identifiable themes emerge that allow for categorization, whether ideological, personal, or psychological. In this instance, however, those categories remained incomplete. The lack of a coherent narrative explanation created a gap that no amount of technical reconstruction could fill. To address this, investigators expanded their focus to include long-term behavioral history. This involved examining earlier periods of life for potential indicators of gradual psychological development or change. However, the findings remained inconclusive. There were no clear turning points, no documented escalations in external behavior that could easily explain the scale of the event in its final form. This absence did not mean absence of cause, but rather absence of clarity. It forced investigators to consider the possibility that traditional explanatory models might not fully apply. Instead of a single defining factor, the case appeared to involve a combination of isolated behaviors that, when combined over time, produced an outcome that was difficult to interpret through conventional frameworks. During this phase, coordination between agencies became even more critical. Federal investigators, local law enforcement, forensic experts, and behavioral analysts worked in parallel, continuously sharing updates and refining hypotheses. Large-scale data integration systems were used to manage the volume of information, allowing teams to identify correlations that might otherwise have gone unnoticed. One of the more subtle breakthroughs came from spatial analysis of the hotel room itself. Detailed mapping of object placement, movement paths within the space, and sightline reconstruction allowed investigators to better understand how the environment had been utilized functionally. This analysis confirmed that the room had been arranged in a way that maximized external visibility while minimizing internal disruption, reinforcing earlier conclusions about deliberate preparation. At the same time, investigative teams continued to analyze the broader security context of the hotel. This included reviewing surveillance coverage, access control systems, and staff movement patterns. While no systemic failure was identified that directly enabled the event, the review contributed to a larger discussion about detection limits in large, high-traffic environments. As weeks turned into months, the investigation began to shift from immediate reconstruction toward synthesis. Instead of searching for new evidence, teams focused on integrating existing findings into a coherent narrative framework. This process involved reconciling behavioral analysis, forensic evidence, digital data, and witness testimony into a unified sequence of events. Even as this synthesis progressed, certain elements remained resistant to interpretation. Chief among them was the absence of a clearly articulated motive. This gap became not just a missing piece of the investigation, but a defining characteristic of the case itself. It challenged assumptions about causality and forced reconsideration of how such events are understood within broader analytical systems. The breakthrough, therefore, was not a single answer but a structural realization that the event had been executed with deliberate planning, technical awareness, and sustained preparation, yet without an accessible explanatory narrative that could be easily categorized. This distinction reshaped how investigators approached not only this case, but also future analyses of similar incidents. By the end of this phase, the investigation had achieved a level of clarity regarding mechanics, sequence, and responsibility. What remained unresolved was the deeper question of intent. And it was precisely that absence of resolution that marked the true complexity of the case. The breakthrough, in its final form, was not closure. It was recognition that understanding could be partial, structured, and still incomplete. When the investigative phase began to stabilize into structured findings, the focus of the case gradually shifted away from reconstruction and toward legal interpretation. In many criminal cases, the path to justice is defined by courtroom proceedings, adversarial arguments, and the presentation of evidence before a jury. In this case, however, the absence of surviving defendants fundamentally altered the legal trajectory. There would be no trial in the traditional sense, no courtroom confrontation, and no opportunity for direct testimony from the central figure of the investigation. Instead, the justice process took shape through documentation, institutional review, and public accountability. The legal system was tasked not with determining guilt, which was already established through physical evidence and investigative conclusion, but with defining responsibility, understanding systemic implications, and addressing the broader consequences of the event. The official determination that Stephen Paddock acted alone became a foundational element of this phase. This conclusion, reached after extensive review of forensic data, surveillance records, and behavioral analysis, shaped the legal framing of the incident. It established that there were no identified accomplices, no organizational network, and no external command structure influencing the actions taken. In legal terms, this simplified certain aspects of liability while intensifying others, particularly those related to prevention, detection, and institutional oversight. Without a trial, the role of the justice system expanded beyond adjudication into interpretation. Federal agencies, including the Department of Justice and the FBI, compiled comprehensive reports detailing findings from the investigation. These reports served as the primary legal record of the event, functioning as both evidentiary summary and analytical conclusion. They documented the sequence of events, the preparation involved, the operational mechanics, and the resulting impact on victims and public spaces. At the same time, state and local authorities conducted parallel reviews focusing on emergency response, coordination protocols, and interagency communication. These reviews were not concerned with assigning criminal guilt, but with evaluating procedural effectiveness. Questions arose regarding response timing, communication clarity, and resource allocation during the critical minutes of the incident. The objective was to identify areas where systems performed effectively and where structural improvements were necessary. In the absence of a courtroom trial, public hearings and official briefings became the primary venues for presenting findings. These sessions were carefully structured to balance transparency with sensitivity, particularly given the scale of loss involved. Officials presented timelines, summarized investigative conclusions, and responded to questions regarding the scope and limitations of the findings. For many observers, these proceedings functioned as a substitute for traditional legal resolution, offering a form of structured understanding in place of adversarial judgment. One of the central themes that emerged during this phase was the challenge of accountability in cases involving isolated actors. Without external collaborators or organizational frameworks, traditional legal categories of conspiracy or coordinated intent did not apply. This raised complex questions about how justice is defined when responsibility is singular but impact is collective. The legal system was required to operate within a space that did not fit neatly into established frameworks. Victim advocacy groups played a significant role during this period, ensuring that the human dimension of the case remained central to public discourse. Families of those affected participated in hearings, provided statements, and engaged with institutional processes designed to recognize loss. Their involvement shaped the tone of the justice phase, shifting it from purely analytical review to a more holistic acknowledgement of human impact. Compensation mechanisms were also activated as part of the legal response. Funds were established to support victims and families, covering medical expenses, counseling services, and long-term recovery needs. These mechanisms were not framed as restitution in a legal sense, since no surviving defendant existed to assign liability, but rather as a collective societal response to unprecedented harm. In parallel, policy discussions began to emerge at both state and federal levels. Lawmakers and regulatory bodies examined the implications of the event for public safety, particularly in relation to large-scale gatherings and venue security. One of the most widely discussed outcomes was the regulation of firearm accessories, which had been identified as a contributing factor in the technical execution of the incident. These discussions led to policy changes aimed at restricting certain modifications, reflecting an effort to address vulnerabilities identified during the investigation. However, legislative responses were not uniform. Debates surrounding interpretation, constitutional rights, and enforcement limitations created divisions among policymakers. Some advocated for broader reforms focused on prevention and access control, while others emphasized enforcement of existing laws rather than expansion of regulatory frameworks. As a result, the policy landscape that emerged was fragmented, reflecting broader national debates rather than a single unified response. Within the justice phase, another important dimension was institutional learning. Federal agencies conducted internal reviews to assess how intelligence, surveillance, and behavioral indicators had been processed prior to the event. These reviews did not identify specific failures that could have definitively prevented the incident, but they did highlight areas where information integration and risk assessment processes could be improved. This aspect of the justice process was forward-looking rather than retrospective. It focused on strengthening systems to better identify patterns of concern in the future, particularly in environments where traditional indicators may not be easily visible. Training programs, analytical frameworks, and interagency communication protocols were updated as part of this effort. For the public, however, the concept of justice extended beyond institutional reform. It was also deeply emotional and symbolic. Many sought meaning in acknowledgement, remembrance, and recognition of loss. Memorial services held in Las Vegas and other cities provided spaces for collective mourning. Names of victims were read aloud in public ceremonies, transforming statistical loss into individual remembrance. These acts of remembrance became an essential component of the justice process, even though they operated outside formal legal structures. They represented a societal acknowledgement that justice is not only about systems and conclusions, but also about memory and continuity. The act of naming and remembering served as a form of narrative restoration, countering the fragmentation created by the event itself. Media coverage during this phase also played a role in shaping public understanding of justice. Reporting focused not only on investigative findings, but also on human stories, institutional responses, and policy implications. Over time, the narrative shifted from immediate shock to sustained reflection, as the event became part of broader discussions about safety, public space, and societal vulnerability. Despite the extensive legal and institutional response, a sense of incompleteness remained. The absence of a traditional trial meant that certain questions were never addressed in a courtroom setting. There was no opportunity for cross-examination, no formal presentation of motive, and no adversarial testing of interpretation. This absence did not undermine the findings of the investigation, but it did shape how justice was perceived by those seeking closure. For many affected individuals, justice became less about resolution and more about adaptation. It involved learning to exist within a reality that had been permanently altered, while engaging with systems designed to acknowledge and support that change. Counseling services, community networks, and survivor groups became part of this long-term process, offering continuity beyond formal legal proceedings. As time passed, the justice phase gradually transitioned into institutional memory. Reports were archived, policies were implemented, and procedural changes were integrated into standard practice. The case remained referenced in training materials, policy discussions, and emergency preparedness planning, serving as a point of analysis for future risk assessment. Yet even as institutional responses stabilized, the broader meaning of justice in this context remained complex. It encompassed legal conclusion, procedural review, policy reform, and emotional recognition simultaneously. It was not contained within a single outcome, but distributed across multiple layers of response. In the end, the justice phase of the Las Vegas shooting case demonstrated both the capacity and the limitations of legal systems when confronting events that defy conventional structure. It showed how justice can be achieved in documentation and reform, even in the absence of traditional courtroom resolution. But it also revealed that some aspects of human loss resist full integration into institutional frameworks. What remained was a system that had responded, adapted, and recorded, and a public that continued to live with the consequences of an event that could be explained in structure, but never fully contained in meaning. In the weeks following the Las Vegas shooting, the city did not return to normal. It learned how to function again, but function is not the same as recovery. The lights on the Strip continued to glow, casinos reopened their floors, and tourists eventually returned, drawn back by habit, plans, and the strange resilience of places built on entertainment. Yet beneath that surface continuity, something fundamental had shifted. Las Vegas had become a place that remembered itself differently. For survivors, the aftermath began the moment immediate danger ended. There was no clear boundary between the incident and its consequences. Some people found themselves standing far from the festival grounds without knowing how they got there. Others were still searching for friends or family long after emergency services had secured the area. The sense of dislocation was not only physical, but temporal, as if time itself had fractured during those 10 to 11 minutes, and never fully realigned afterward. Hospitals across the city remained in extended emergency mode for days. Medical staff worked through exhaustion, treating injuries that ranged from immediately life-threatening to psychologically devastating. Some patients required surgery, while others needed only stabilization before the more complex work of emotional recovery could begin. The sheer volume of cases forced hospitals to rely on coordinated transfers, shared resources, and rotating teams that blurred the line between acute response and long-term care. Outside medical settings, the process of identification and notification continued. Families waited in designated areas, hotels, and temporary shelters, often without clear timelines for information. The uncertainty itself became a form of sustained trauma. For some, confirmation came quickly. For others, hours turned into days before answers arrived. In that interval, hope and dread coexisted in unstable balance, neither fully resolving into the other. When names were finally confirmed, grief took on a public dimension. Vigils appeared across the country and internationally, often organized spontaneously by communities with no direct connection to the victims. Candles, photographs, and handwritten messages formed temporary memorials in parks, city squares, and outside public buildings. These spaces became physical expressions of collective mourning, allowing individuals who had never met the victims to participate in recognition and remembrance. In Las Vegas itself, memorial gatherings took on a different tone. The city was both site and symbol of the tragedy, and this duality shaped how grief was expressed. Public ceremonies were held with careful attention to dignity and restraint. Names were read aloud slowly, allowing each life to be acknowledged individually rather than absorbed into statistics. Silence in these moments became as important as speech. For survivors, the psychological aftermath unfolded in layers. In the immediate days following the event, many experienced a state of emotional numbness. This was followed by waves of realization that arrived unpredictably, often triggered by ordinary sounds, crowded spaces, or sudden changes in environment. The mind, having adapted to extreme threat, struggled to recalibrate to safety. This dissonance created a persistent sense of unease that could surface without warning. Sleep became difficult for many. Dreams and memory fragments blended together, making it hard to distinguish between recollection and reconstruction. Some individuals avoided large gatherings entirely, while others attempted to return to normal routines as quickly as possible, seeking stability through familiarity. There was no single pattern of recovery, only a wide spectrum of responses shaped by individual experience and psychological resilience. Families of those who were lost faced a different kind of permanence. Their grief was not episodic, but continuous. Everyday life continued around them, but it was now structured around absence. Birthdays, anniversaries, and routine milestones became markers of what was no longer present. In many cases, personal belongings recovered from the festival became deeply symbolic, representing both connection and rupture. Community support systems expanded in response to this long-term need. Counseling services, support groups, and non-profit organizations provided structured environments for processing trauma. These spaces were often defined not by solutions, but by shared understanding. Speaking about the event became part of recovery, not because it resolved pain, but because it allowed it to exist outside isolation. At a broader societal level, the aftermath prompted renewed debate about public safety and collective vulnerability. Large-scale events, once primarily associated with entertainment and celebration, were now also considered through the lens of risk assessment. Event organizers, venue managers, and security professionals began reviewing protocols for crowd management, emergency evacuation, and situational awareness. These discussions were not limited to Las Vegas, but extended to cities and countries around the world. Policy responses varied across jurisdictions. Some regions implemented changes to firearm regulations, particularly concerning accessories that had been identified as relevant to the technical execution of the attack. Others focused on enhancing surveillance systems, communication infrastructure, and emergency response coordination. While these measures reflected attempts to reduce future risk, they also highlighted ongoing divisions in how societies interpret responsibility and prevention. In parallel, media narratives continued to evolve. Initial coverage focused on immediate impact and unfolding events. Over time, reporting shifted toward analysis, reflection, and commemoration. Documentaries, investigative features, and survivor interviews contributed to a broader understanding of the incident, but they also raised ethical questions about representation, memory, and the boundaries of public storytelling. For Las Vegas as a city, the long-term aftermath involved a complex negotiation between memory and identity. The city could not distance itself from what had occurred, yet it also could not redefine itself entirely around a single event. Economic activity resumed, conventions returned, and entertainment continued, but the awareness of what had happened remained embedded in the collective consciousness of both residents and visitors. Security practices at large events were adjusted in visible and invisible ways. Bag checks became more structured, surveillance more integrated, and coordination between private security and public law enforcement more formalized. These changes were designed not only to prevent recurrence, but also to restore confidence among attendees. Safety, in this context, became both a practical requirement and a psychological reassurance. Over time, public attention gradually shifted away from the event, as is common in large-scale tragedies. However, for those directly affected, there was no such shift. The aftermath did not conclude, it continued in quieter forms, embedded in daily life. Certain dates carried weight. Certain sounds triggered memory. Certain places remained difficult to navigate emotionally, even when physically unchanged. What emerged in the long term was a layered understanding of aftermath itself. It was not a single phase following an event, but an ongoing condition shaped by adaptation, remembrance, and adjustment. For some, it involved rebuilding routines. For others, it involved redefining identity in the absence of what had been lost. For institutions, it involved continuous refinement of systems designed to prevent and respond. The city of Las Vegas, with its constant reinvention, absorbed the event into its history without fully enclosing it. New visitors arrived who had no direct memory of that night, yet the infrastructure of safety, memory, and policy that surrounded them had been shaped in part by its consequences. In this way, the aftermath extended beyond those who experienced the event directly, influencing environments they would never consciously associate with it. Even years later, the incident remained present in subtle ways. Training scenarios referenced it. Policy documents cited it. Survivors continued to share their experiences in public forums. The event became both specific and symbolic, anchored in time, but expanding in meaning as it was analyzed, discussed, and remembered. The aftermath, ultimately, was not an ending but a continuation in a different form. It was the slow integration of an unthinkable moment into the ongoing structure of everyday life, where memory and function coexist, without fully reconciling. After the initial wave of grief, analysis, and public reaction began to settle, something more difficult to define emerged in the space left behind. It was not closure, and it was not resolution. It was a kind of silence that existed beneath daily life, a quiet persistence of memory that did not demand attention, but also did not disappear. In Las Vegas, in the United States, and across the world, the event slowly transitioned from immediate crisis to historical reference, but for those closest to it, the silence never fully arrived. In the months after the investigation concluded its early public phases, the city continued to function in its familiar rhythm. The Strip returned to its cycle of crowds, performances, and constant motion. Neon lights resumed their dominance over the night sky, and hotel corridors filled once again with travelers moving between destinations. Yet beneath this continuity, there was an altered awareness that could not be unlearned. People moved through the same spaces with a different kind of attention, even if they could not always articulate why. For survivors, the passage of time did not erase the event. Instead, it redistributed it. Memory no longer appeared as a single block of experience, but as fragments that surfaced unexpectedly. A sound that resembled distant percussion. A sudden crowd movement in a public space. A moment of confusion in a loud environment. Each of these could trigger a brief return to that night, not as full recollection, but as emotional echo. Psychological recovery in such cases is rarely linear. Some individuals found stability through routine, returning to work, travel, or social life as a way of re-establishing control over their environment. Others struggled with persistent anxiety, avoiding crowded spaces or large events. There was no uniform path forward, only individual negotiations between memory and daily function. Therapeutic support systems expanded significantly in response to long-term needs. Counseling centers reported sustained demand well beyond the initial months. Group sessions provided structured environments where survivors could share experiences without needing to explain the context repeatedly. In these spaces, silence often carried as much meaning as speech. The act of being present with others who understood required no elaboration. Families of victims continued to experience grief in a form that did not diminish but evolved. The absence remained constant, but its expression changed over time. Early stages were marked by shock and urgency, while later stages became defined by integration into everyday life. Birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays became moments of heightened awareness, where memory and absence intersected more sharply. In many households, objects associated with those lost became central to remembrance. Clothing, photographs, handwritten notes, and personal belongings were preserved carefully, not as relics of the past, but as ongoing points of connection. These items were not static symbols, they functioned as active elements of memory, allowing grief to remain present in a tangible form. Public memory of the event also evolved. In the immediate aftermath, coverage was intense and continuous. Over time, attention shifted toward other events, as is typical in global news cycles. Yet the incident did not disappear from public consciousness. Instead, it became part of a broader framework of reference when discussing mass gatherings, public safety, and vulnerability in open spaces. Educational institutions, emergency response agencies, and policy organizations incorporated the event into training materials and case studies. It was examined not only for its specific circumstances, but also for its implications regarding preparedness, coordination, and response under extreme conditions. These analyses were not focused on reliving the event, but on understanding structural lessons that could inform future practice. Within Las Vegas itself, the integration of memory into urban life took subtle forms. Security protocols at large events were updated, not always visibly, but through layered procedural changes. Coordination between private security and public agencies became more formalized. Emergency communication systems were reviewed and adjusted to improve clarity under high-pressure conditions. These modifications reflected a broader attempt to strengthen resilience without transforming the character of the city. Tourism eventually stabilized, though perceptions of safety became part of the underlying conversation surrounding large-scale entertainment events. Visitors returned for the same reasons they always had, drawn by experience, entertainment, and escape. Yet the infrastructure they moved through had been shaped by a moment that altered how safety was conceptualized within that environment. For investigators and professionals involved in the case, the passage of time brought a different kind of reflection. The transition from active investigation to archival record did not mark an end to engagement with the event. Instead, it shifted their relationship to it. Reports were reviewed in training contexts. Procedures were updated. Lessons were extracted and applied. In this way, the event continued to exist within professional practice long after public attention had moved on. One of the most persistent aspects of the case remained its lack of a clear, universally accepted explanation for motivation. This absence continued to be discussed in academic, psychological, and analytical contexts. It challenged conventional frameworks that rely on identifiable causation, forcing a reconsideration of how certain forms of human behavior are categorized and understood. In broader cultural terms, the event became part of a larger conversation about unpredictability in modern public life. Large gatherings, once primarily associated with celebration, were now also understood as spaces requiring complex layers of preparation and awareness. This shift did not diminish their value, but it did alter the way they were perceived and managed. As years passed, anniversaries of the event were marked with quiet remembrance. In Las Vegas, moments of silence were observed in formal and informal ways. Some were organized publicly, others occurred privately among individuals and families. These acts of remembrance did not seek to reopen investigation or reframe conclusions. They served instead as acknowledgments of continuity between past and present. For those who experienced the event directly, time did not eliminate its presence, but it did change its form. The intensity of immediate trauma gradually gave way to integration into personal narrative. Life continued, but it did so alongside memory rather than beyond it. The event became part of identity without fully defining it. In the end, what remained most striking was not only the scale of what had occurred, but the way it continued to exist in absence of resolution. There was no final moment of closure, no definitive emotional endpoint that applied universally. Instead, there was an ongoing coexistence between life as it had been and life as it became afterward. The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with memory, adaptation, and the quiet persistence of lives that continued in the presence of something that could not be fully concluded.